week. I want to mention something about the concept of the Sfirot, which actually came up in a conversation that Ann and I were having through email. And that is that, when we first encountered the term Sfirah, when we talk about the 10 Sfirot, that was back when we were looking at Sefer Yetzirah, which is a non-Kabbalistic book. Certainly a book of Jewish mysticism, but there the word Sfirah meant something very different. However, we did talk at that time about some of the associations with the word Sfirah in the Hebrew language, and I should mention them just a little bit so that you remember some of these associations, because they, like many of the things in the language of Kabbalah, they do have some coded significance. So the word Sfirah is related to the word Sefer, which means book or scroll. Right? Lesaper means to count. Right? And so I don't know what that means, except that our Sfirot certainly have a specific counting. Just as in Sefer Yetzirah, it says, there are 10 and not 9, 10 and not 11. So in the normal way of Kabbalah, there are specifically 10 Sfirot, not 9 and not 11, even though Sfirot here means something very different. It's also related to the word sapir, which means sapphire, which means a jewel. So certainly the Sfirot are jewels. They are precious connections through which we are ultimately united with God. I think it's useful to have some of these analogies in mind as we refer to this term. Let's go back to the text that we have, the same text that was available to you through the website that we discussed last time. And that is text number 3 from the Tikkunei HaZohar, a late addition to the Zoharic literature, in which Rabbi Shimon and his colleagues are visiting with the prophet Elijah. You can imagine that there would be some sparks involved in a meeting between the holy prophet Elijah and the holy leader of the mystical group, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and his colleagues. So they are actually visiting the heavenly academy, and they are meeting with Elijah. Hopefully, somebody remembered exactly what he said. They didn't leave anything out. And so we get some interesting information from the prophet Elijah. And he says that, you are one, but not numbered, God. And you are higher than the highest, hidden within all secrets, utterly incomprehensible. Right? Next.
Danny?
I'm sorry?
Do you want me to interrupt with questions or wait?
Please, feel free to just jump in, Lou.
Okay, that'll be a lot. So this text comes, as you said last week, comes from the late 13th century.
This one actually may be 14th century, kind of an add-on to the Zoharic literature.
Okay,
The Zohar first appears around the year 1280, but a lot of things got thrown into the manuscripts together, and they are, scholars regard them as later editions.
Was there do we know if there was some teaching or story about Elijah and Shimon Bar Yochai that carried over, or did somebody probably make it up at the time?
It's probably made up at the time. To the best of my knowledge, there's not a specific encounter between Shimon Bar Yochai and the prophet Elijah in rabbinic literature, but I would really have to search for that. But I don't think there's one. I think that this is, the creative mind of whatever author or group gets involved with this story.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So Elijah continues. You generated 10 tikkunim, 10 perfections, which we call the 10 sfirot. Through them, you govern secret worlds which are not revealed and revealed worlds. In them, you are concealed from human beings, but you are the one who binds and unites them. Since you are within them, whoever separates one of these 10 from the others, it is as if he divided you. We all know we to divide God is really a heretical action. Right? So 10 tikkunim, 10 perfections. We're going to say a lot more later on about tikkun, which is a very important term in Kabbalah. Literally means repair. We'll see a lot more about that when we get to Lurianic Kabbalah next year. But even here in the Zohar, the mystic takes a certain amount of responsibility in order to find and repair different flaws within the cosmos, and certainly flaws that exist within the mystic himself. Right? Now here, tikkunim really is just a reference to the sfirot. It's a way of talking about the sfirot as if each of them presents opportunities for repair. Because, they all have contact with the lower realms, directly or indirectly. So we need to make sure that we utilize them to fix whatever problems there are within the system. So there is something of a paradox here between the Ein Sof and the Sfirot. Well, Ein Sof, the infinite, reveals itself stage by stage through the Sfirot, and the Sfirot make it possible to have some comprehension of God. But God, the Ein Sof, God is concealed by the Sfirot. They may have some reflection of God, but they also prevent us. They give us maybe a screen between us and God. Again, as we see many times in discussing Jewish mysticism, closeness with God is highly desired and also highly combustible. You don't want to get too close to the power because who can stand up to all that power? So the Ein Sof is protected from us, and the Sfirot are kind of like a bulletproof vest, if you will, which prevent us from the power of the Ein Sof, protect us from the power. 10 Sfirot are just, one unified system which hold and protect us from the light of the Ein Sof. The text speaks of the Sfirot as if they were independent, but it reminds us that they're not independent. We don't want to treat the Sfirot as if they were gods, right? That would, you can't have more than one God. So the Zohar stresses there's just one God who unites all these Sfirot within himself, so that, if you would try to separate any one of them from the others and give it a life of its own, that would be unacceptable, right? That would be to suggest that there is division within God, which we don't accept, not under any circumstances. So, one who ascribes separate, independent existence to any Sfirah is as if they deface the oneness of the Ein Sof. Okay. Anyone have any questions or comments at this point?
Yes, sir.
Please.
All right. So all of the Sefirot are interconnected.
Yes.
But according to the diagram and the model, not all directly interconnected, but I'm assuming that for example, let me pick one. So the Bina is not, there's no line directly connecting to Netzach, okay? But I would assume that there could be an emanation energy connection directly between Bina and Netzach that doesn't go through Tiferet? Yes.
Correct.
Or no?
And the diagram is not to be taken as all inclusive, right?
But it's the one we're looking. Yeah, it's the one we're
every
looking at.
Sfirah has a potential connection with the others.
Good. Okay. And are those connections or flow intermittent as might be necessary, or continuous all the time?
Yes.
Okay.
There's not a clear answer for all circumstances. The answer is, if it serves a cosmic purpose, then there's a connection. There may or may not be a connection that's constant.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
There are certain constants that are strongly emphasized. Like, for instance, the connection, most especially the connection between Tiferet and Malchut. Also, the balance between Chesed and Gevurah. But is there, always a connection necessary between any combination of two Sfirot? I would say not necessarily.
I'm good. Thank you.
All right. Other questions or comments here? All right, then. Moving along. Okay. So the text continues. These 10 Sfirot flow forth in order. One long, one short, one in between. You are the one who guides them, but no one guides you, not from above, not from below, nor in any direction. You have prepared garments for them from which souls fly to human beings, and you have prepared various bodies for them. They're called bodies, but only in contrast to the garments covering them. Okay, let's break this down just a little bit. What are the garments that are being referred to here? Later on, we will see that Kabbalah suggests that there are 4 different worlds of emanation, and the garments here allude to 3 of those. So you may have a different sfirot in different worlds, and those sfirot are a garment for the world that's above that one, right? And they are also a body clothed in the sfirot of the world below, right? So even though there are 10 sfirot, this refers to 3 different segments, okay? 3 different sfirot, and you have 3 of them that are very closely bound together. You have Chesed and Gvurah and Tiferet. Right? You have a number of different triangles formed by the different groups of Sfirot. This is a very important triangle. As I mentioned before, Chesed and Gvurah are associated with Abraham and Isaac. Tiferet is associated with Jacob, who is meant to be kind of a synthesis of the characteristics, hopefully the good characteristics, of his father and his grandfather. Okay? So Tiferet kind of pools together the different elements from Chesed and Gevurah. Okay? Comments or questions up to here?
Can I go back a paragraph in your book?
Yeah, I'm not looking at the book, so
but it's not part of this text, but it describes, and it talks about the Ein Sof revealing itself stage by stage through the Sfirot.
Yes.
That's the quote in the book. Without them, we could not even apprehend a reflection of it. So, is the connection we might have to a sphira something that is direct, or only as a reflection or a mirror image or a shadow?
Well, again, unfortunately, I have to say the answer to that is yes, in that all of those answers that you suggest are possible.
Like when Moses was on Mount Sinai the second time and wanted to see God's face, God said, "I'll pass. You hide here, and you can see my shadow as I pass,
or my back, as it were." Okay.
Right.
So here, yeah, there may be indirect connections, but sometimes the connections are very clear and very, very powerful. Particularly with some of the connections between Sfirot that I've emphasized as having strong importance. And the connection, as we will see, between Tiferet and Malchut is absolutely critical. And it's very direct, and it's very important. Others, not so much. I mean, they work their way down and together in significant ways, but they are less important connections. Okay?
Thank you.
All right. Anyone else? Comments, questions? I don't want to assume that everybody is in a state of absolute clarity about all this, because I know that's not possible. That would be very unlikely, right? It's just not that simple. But
understand the best we can.
well, yes, please. But again, if you have questions or issues along the way, feel free to jump in. All right, next segment of the text. These bodies are named according to this arrangement. Chesed is the right arm, Gvura is the left arm, Tiferet is the trunk of the body. This is like the original version of the diagram that Janice Rubin showed us last week of the wrote organized as if it were parts of the human body. And I think this may be the very first text that actually refers to it in this way. Netzach and Hod are the two legs. Yesod, the completion of the body. That's somewhat euphemistic, right? Because Yesod represents the genitals. Is the sign of the Holy Covenant, right? The covenant is, the breed. Malchut is the mouth, which we call the oral Torah. Going back up to the top, Chokhmah is the brain, inner thought. Bina is the heart, of which it is said, the heart understands. So the word understand is boneh, right? Which is the verb form of bina. Okay? The supernal Keter is the crown of royalty, Keter Malchut, of which it is said, it declares the end from the beginning. It is the headpiece of the tefillin, within which are the letters of the ineffable name of God, Yud-He Vav-He, which is the path of emanation, the sap of the tree, spreading through its arms and branches, like water drenching a tree, which then flourishes. So, this arrangement into the metaphorical parts of the human body gives us a way to look at and understand the Sfirot just a little bit better. And the Malchut represents speech, because, as we said last time, Malchut is also referred to in code language by the term the oral Torah, the Torah Sheba'al Peh, contrasting with Tiferet, which is the written Torah. The mouth may also be a euphemism for the female sexual organ, which receives the seed from the man's organ, from Yesod. Right? And so this is part of the process of divine influence. The term Lev Mevin, the heart understands, has to do with the direct relationship between Mevin, understanding, and Bina. Right? So the text also alludes to the difference between Chokhmah and Bina. Chokhmah being more, the general power of intellect, and Bina much more like what we would see as female intuition. Right? But they are both concealed. They're not things that they're not parts of this whole tree that we can apprehend. Keter is crown of royalty, but Malchut is, which also means kingship, which means royalty, is the last of the Sfirot. So there's kind of this idea of unification within the entire system. And the verse says it declares the end from the beginning. So everything is planned from the start. Keter is also represented in some drawings as the strap of the headpiece of the tefillin, which is wrapped around the brain referring to Chokhmah. And at the root of Keter are the letters of God's name, Yud He Vav He, and when you spell those out in full, meaning Yud, the first letter of the four-letter name, the letter Yud is, if you put it into a word, it's Yud Vav Dalet. Hey might be spelled Hey Aleph, right? Etc. Vav is Vav Aleph Vav, and then Hey again, right? So if you look at them that way, the four letters of the name of God, when all spelled out in letters, contain not 4, but 10 different letters. So they signify the 10 sfirot that emanate from the Ein Sof. And then there's this term, the sap of the tree, the sap of the cosmic tree. So that's a reference to Keter. Keter has a certain energy to it which waters all the rest of the tree. Sometimes it's called the root of roots. Tiferet is also frequently referred to as the tree, has all those arms and branches that represent the other sfirot around and below it. So this is like, a general statement about all the flow that comes from above to all the sfirot and the specific point of Tiferet, which is, very central to the whole scheme. So the Zohar here is really trying to work with how God's creativity begins, how this first impulse to create comes into being. Yes.
Question about the quote from Isaiah. It declares the end from the beginning, and I sort of understand the linkage that you mentioned, that everything is planned from the start. If
Yes.
It's a big if, capital I, capital F. If there is a plan that can't or won't be changed. But that's not what we're taught. We're taught that we have free will and we can make decisions that are different than maybe what God thought would happen.
Right. So when it says, it declares the end from the beginning, it's not talking about predestination of human activity. It's talking about how the process of creation is dictated from the highest level. Okay?
I'll have to try to process that.
Understood. Right? But it's not a statement about human predestination. That's not part of this text, I think. Okay, anyone else? All right, moving along. Next part of this text. Master of the worlds, you are the cause of causes, the reason for all reasons. You irrigate that tree with that flow, a flow that is like a soul and life for the body. You have neither likeness nor image of anything within or without. You created heaven and earth, bringing forth from them sun, moon, stars, and constellations. And on earth, trees, grass, the Garden of Eden, animals, birds, fish, and human beings, also as to know through them what is beyond, and how above and below are governed, and how above and below become known. About you, no one knows anything. Besides you, above and below, there is no union. You are known as Lord over all. Each of the Sfirot is known by a name by which the angels are called. But you have no name we can know, for you pervade all names, even as you are the perfect completion of them all. When you withdraw from them, every name is left like a body without a soul. Okay, so here you see this term, cause of causes, right? That's a very Aristotelian term, and its philosophical importance would have been known to virtually anybody reading this text. Any educated person, and certainly educated Jews, would have been familiar with the philosophical context of that, right? But here it is also referring to the Ein Sof. The Ein Sof, which causes everything else, which provides the flow that sustains all of life. But it has neither likeness nor image of anything within or without. You can't show the Ein Sof. You can't describe it. You can't explain it. Much as we try, much as there are many texts that try, but we don't. We can't. It has no likeness from the outside. It's anything outside which is not really divine, and has no likeness from within the Sfirot. But the contemplation of creation provides a means to understand a little bit about how God runs these realms, both the higher realms and our realms. Because once again, whatever is below in our world has a mirror image in the higher, more spiritual world. We also get angels along the way. And angels are sometimes identified with specific Sfirot. The angel Michael with Chesed and Gabriel with Gevurah, because the Sfira presumably acts through the power of that particular angel. The Ein Sof ultimately has no name. It can have no name. The Ein Sof just, is within all names, all beings. If it would withdraw from a name, that name or that being would disintegrate because it would no longer have anything to sustain it. Okay. Questions or comments here? All right. Charge on. Next piece. You are wise, but not with any wisdom that can be known. You understand, but not with any understanding that can be known. You have no known place, except that which makes known your power and your might to human beings, showing them how the world is conducted through judgment and compassion, which are righteousness and justice in accordance with human action. Judgment, din, is gevurah. Justice is the central pillar. Righteousness, tzedek, is holy malchut. Scales of righteousness are the two true pedestals. An honest measure, a balance between those pedestals, is the sign of the covenant. It is all to show how the world is conducted. But it is not that you have a known righteousness with his judgment or a known justice which is mercy, nor any of these attributes at all. So here again, we're pushing this idea of the unity of the Ein Sof. Whatever Chochmah and Bina are part of Ein Sof, they are not separate from it. They are, completely involved with it. The Sfirot of Chochmah and Bina are known by these names because the qualities of Ein Sof are things that they flow through them, and they are brought to the rest of the system. The Ein Sof has no known place, which is in contrast to the Sfirot that seem to have some definition and boundaries, but do not ever suggest that the Ein Sof has such qualities. Danny Matt, the translator of the Zohar, has a nice way of saying this. He says, Ein Sof cannot be confined by any label, even divine labels. That's how mysterious and unknowable the Ein Sof really is. The purpose of the Sfirot is simply to show us the forces that govern the world. And we're given a few more details about the Sfirot here. Some of the code language, Din, judgment, it's a name for Gevurah. Justice, that's the central pillar that's referred to here. That's a reference to Tiferet. Tzedek is associated first with Netzach, with Gevurah, and finally with Malchut. The two true pedestals, that refers to Netzach and Hod. The sign of the covenant, again, that is Yesod. Anything referring to the covenant, you'll see, is generally a reference to Yesod. And yet none of these are really separate from the Ein Sof. They only seem to be. They appear to be separate when they are emanated into these Sfirot, and only so to show us how the world functions. So there are a couple of things about the world of the Sfirot that we learn from this. First of all, they are unified. The 10 Sfirot are not separate. They are one unity that reflects everything within God's life. Everything, and nothing is necessarily static about God's life. It's over, it's continuing, it's changing. Right? But the Ein Sof is ultimately unchanging. Right? And each one of the Sfirot is a little bit separate and has a world of its own. And as such, each one relates to all of the others. Okay? Let me stop here a little bit and ask for whatever questions or comments you might have.
Danny?
Questions?
Are the interactions that the patriarchs and Moses had with God represented or explained specifically as some of the interactions with the Sfirot? For example, when Moses saw the burning bush, is that one connection with one of the Sfirot? Or when Abraham negotiates with God how many righteous people might be living in Sodom?
It's a great question you're asking, Lou. And I think the answer is that sometimes certain actions tap into certain Sfirot more than others, but it would be rare to tap into only one. Even if you're tapping into tzedek, into righteousness, when you talk about sparing the city of Sodom, you're also talking about chesed, right? And so it's like, well, what's the right balance concerning this situation? I mean, I don't necessarily want to think about exactly what the decision was that God made about the city of Sodom, about certain evil domains, right? Because those are the situations where judgment outweighs chesed. But yeah, there are many situations, and they tap into different sfirot. So if God shows Moses a burning bush, would anyone like to speculate on what sfirah is being associated with this?
Do you want an answer?
Yeah.
Obviously I haven't thought about this, but since this is Moses' first interaction with God, and God is opening himself up in a way to Moses.
Yes.
I would suggest right now that it would be Malchut.
Okay. That's a very reasonable answer. Of course, we also know that God is connecting with Moses about the meaning of current events in a way that resembles prophetic knowledge, right? And so we've already seen that prophecy is associated with Netzach and Hod, right? So it may be that those are also key parts of this interaction. Ultimately, there are probably, other explanations that you could give for this event. But those are the ones that I think might make the most sense. I haven't learned a piece of the Zohar specifically about that revelation. So I don't know what the Zohar has to say about it. Okay? Does that help explain it a little bit, Lou?
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else have an observation or a question that you want to raise? Hearing none, let's go to text number 4 from your, quote, handout. Here, another piece of the Zohar. This really from the main part of the Zohar. And we learn as follows. The Yud of the holy name is tied with 3 knots. Therefore, this Yud has 1 point above, 1 point below, and 1 in the middle, since there are 3 knots tied in it. 1 point is above, supernal Keter, the highest of the high, the head of all heads, and it stands above all. 1 point is in the middle, and this is another head. Since there are 3 heads, and each one of them is a head in its own right, and so the middle point is another head that emerges from the point above. This head of all the other heads in the construction of the holy name. And this head is concealed from all. Another head is below, the head that waters the garden, a water spring from which all the plants quench their thirst. This is the Yud with 3 knots. It is therefore called a chain, like a chain that is interlinked, and all is one. So the holy name, you should know that that's referring to the four-letter name of God, the most sacred name of God. What are the three knots? Well, they refer to the first three sfirot, Keter, Chochmah, Bina. Bina, that's the sphira that waters the garden. It gives sustenance to all creation, right? Meaning to the lower sphirot. And they're all very linked together, meaning the sphirot are unified. So, we'll see that the sphirot are also associated with different names of God and with the different letters of the four-letter name. Here, it just emphasizes that Keter is beyond association with any of those letters. Keter relates to the point above. In other words, when you see a yud written in the Torah, you will see just a little jot marking above the yud. It's connected to the yud, but you don't always recognize it as being part of the yud. Right? It's just this little jot above the yud. Right? That's the letter, right, which is representing Keter. Not one of the letters, but so hidden up there that all it really is the jot at the top of the yud. Okay. Comments or questions up to here?
Is this the beginning of an explanation of Yud He Vov He related to different sections of the Sefirah, different points?
Yes. I will caution you that the Zohar very rarely gives you a direct explanation about anything. It's just, it gives you hints and fits and starts. Keeping it from being too specific. Okay. Other questions or comments before we go on? All right, so let's take a look at text number 5, also from the Zohar. And this is really from, once you get past the introductory passages in the Zohar, this is where the Zohar really starts to deal with the text of the Torah. And so it is a commentary. This paragraph is a commentary on the very first verse of the Torah, Bereshit. Bereshit bara Elohim, in the beginning God created. So here is what it says. And so, as you might expect, it's a commentary on what the creative process really is as Kabbalists understand it. At the head of potency, the king made engravings in the luster on high. A spark of impenetrable darkness flashed within the concealed of the concealed. From the head of Ein Sof, a cluster of vapor forming in formlessness, thrust in a ring, not white, not black, not red, not green, no color at all. As a cord surveyed, it yielded radiant colors. Deep within the spark gushed a flow, splaying colors below, concealed within the concealed of the mystery of Ein Sof. It split and did not split, its aura was not known at all until under the impact of splitting, a single concealed supernal point shone. Beyond that point, nothing is known. So it is called Reshit, the first command of all. Okay, so if this isn't confusing, then you're really not paying enough attention. But we'll try to break it down. So when it says the king made engravings, that's Ein Sof beginning the process of implanting the code for everything in the Sfirot. Right? The luster on high refers to Keter. It's code language for Keter, the concealed of the concealed. And in the Zohar, it often talks about that as if Keter were the same as the Ein Sof. So what happens at the beginning of this creation? From the head of Ein Sof, there flashes what the Zohar calls botzina de kardanuta, a spark of impenetrable darkness. It's very brilliant, actually, but it's described as dark because it is concealed. Right? So the blinding spark is this first impulse of emanation that flashes from Ein Sof through Keter, and then it sort of illustrates and delineates all the different Sfirot. He says it forms in formlessness, vapor forming in formlessness, meaning that there really are no forms yet, and it's thrust in a ring. That's code language for Keter, the crown, the supernal crown. Right? It does not show as the four colors mentioned here, which are associated with four of the Sfirot, because there are no forms yet that can show those colors. The Sfirot don't yet exist, but the potential for them is all laid out, and they flow from deep within the spark. This concept of the spark of impenetrable darkness, the botzina de kardanuta, is a good example of the kind of paradox that is often found in Jewish mysticism, and especially within Kabbalah, because so much of what we see in Jewish mysticism defies rational description. And these kinds of paradoxical explanations are just ways of saying that we can't really describe some of what we are talking about. If you have had a mystical experience, you may understand what that means, because when you try to explain that experience to someone else, you may not have adequate language for it. And that's typical in those kinds of experience. Right? Talks about this spark as being a chord surveyed, like a measuring line. It lays out the process and the boundaries of emanation. It splits and does not split. Right? The flow of creation breaks through from Keter and forms the next Sfirah, and then the other Sfirot flow through that. And yet it does not split, because the Ein Sof is never really split. And all the Sfirot, even though they are different domains, they are really part of a unified system. Right? Chokhmah is identified with Reshit, the beginning. It's the highest level in the Sfirot that is in any way recognizable to us. And there were before, 10 commands through which the world was created. We talked about that back when we were talking about the most early forms of mysticism. That there were 10 commands through which the world was created, And the opening verse of Genesis is considered to be the first of these. It's the first command of all. Just as if there were a command included in the term, in the beginning God created. Okay? So the Kabbalists look at those 10 directives that we saw from Pirkei Avot, the 10 expressions of creation in the first chapter of Genesis, and they see those 10 expressions as symbolic of the 10 Sfirot. So let me close here with some questions that you might consider and try to answer for yourselves. First of all, what are the key relationships between the Sfirot? Which are the points, which are the connections that are the most important? What are the key access codes that you have seen up to here? And, before we go too much farther, and as we go into, more of these texts in the next session, how well do you think this system of Sfirot works at making God more comprehensible and more accessible? Those are just some thoughts I leave you with for our next session, which will be after Passover. We'll be off next week and during the week of Passover itself. And then we will come back together, probably, I would assume, in this Zoom session. We can always hope that things, these will come back together sooner rather than later. But it looks like we'll meet again in 3 weeks, and you'll have the Zoom session connection on the website. Again, I want to thank Ashley for helping to get all of this set up and for connecting all of us so very nicely. Thank you, Ashley. And thank you all for being here. Wish, if I don't have a chance to speak to you individually, wish you all a Chag Sameach, a happy and joyous holiday together with families, with whatever groups you celebrate Passover virtually or otherwise.
Thank you,
Thank
Rabbi.
you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Chag Sameach.
Okay, Chag Sameach to all of you.
Thanks so much to everybody.
So long.